Good morning and welcome to the Unitarian Universalist congregation at Montclair. My name is Markus Grae Hauck. My pronouns are he, him, and his. I serve as the Director of Music Ministries for our congregation. And it's good to have you here with us in the space and from wherever you're watching the live stream. I'm joined today by Malinda Loflin as our hymn leader, and we'll also be hearing from Juliana Carr, who's going to be leading our anthem. And we're going to start with the hymn of the month that we're using every Sunday this month to begin our services. Come, come, whoever you are, with the text by the 13th century Persian poet and Sufi mystic Rumi.
Come, come, whoever you are, wanderer, worshiper, lover of leaving, ours is no caravan of despair. Come, yet again come. Come, come, whoever you are, wanderer, worshiper, lover of leaving, ours is no
Universalist songwriter Joyce Pulley.
Whoever you are, wherever you come from, whatever age, ability, history, identity, gender, or sexual orientation, you are welcome to bring your full self here. I am Dan Silver. My pronouns are he, him, and his. Grounded in faith, we come together to nurture the soul, inspire hope, and bring into being a more just and loving world. Today's service invites us to make a commitment to doing what must be done. And today's worship leader is member and candidate for the ministry, Charles Loflin. Charles has been serving as the summer minister at the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Morristown. We are so glad to have him here leading worship in his home congregation. We are also glad to gather together in person with all those who are joining us virtually. We are a community knit together across time and space. We are a community learning what it is and what it means to gather in multiple ways. And for those who are here in person, we ask you to make sure that your phones are muted, but also that you are off the Wi-Fi in the congregation. That's been messing up a little bit our transmission, so if you could take yourself off Wi-Fi and free up that band, that would be great. Our services in August are single services at 10 a.m. Registration for attendance is required, though we will endeavor to make space for all guests. We are maintaining social distance, and all are required to be masked. On September 12th, we are planning to return to services at 9:30 a.m. and 11:15. The 9:30 service will require registration, will maintain social distance, and will not include congregational singing. The 11:15 service will not require registration and will look and feel much like our services did pre-pandemic. On the Sundays of September 12th and 19th, we will have a Welcome Fest with activities and opportunities for connection throughout our facility and on our lawn. Ours is a covenantal community. This means that while we do not share common beliefs, we share a common covenant, a commitment to come together in service to the beloved community. Let us light our chalice as we share our chalice lighting affirmation. Let us open our senses to take in the beauty. Let us open our minds to learn what is true. Let us open our hearts to love one another.
Good morning. I am Charles Loflin, and my pronouns are he, him, his, or they. I am joined with Dan Silver, our liturgist, and our story is called An Egg, a Potato, and Tea. Once there was a young woman committed to making her community a better place. If she saw something that was unfair, she spoke up. If she saw something that needed to change, then she took action. And it wasn't long before a small group of people joined with her, and together they found that they could do even more. And for a long time, the group worked together to accomplish their goals. But then they ran into a problem. There was an issue that the group agreed needed to change, but there was disagreement about what the change should be. Some people wanted to do this, and some people wanted to do that, and some people wanted to do both this and that. Even though they all agreed that it was a problem, they were having trouble on agreeing what to do about it. Well, the young girl was growing frustrated, and she was worried about how the struggle was affecting the group. This was a really difficult situation, and she didn't know for sure what to do, and she was beginning to feel like giving up. What was she supposed to do? So, she asked her grandmother for advice. Her grandmother listened carefully to her concerns and then invited her into the kitchen. She filled a pot with water. And to the water pot, she added 3 things: an egg, a potato, and some tea leaves. The grandmother let these sit and boil, and after a while, she put the egg on a small plate and the potato on another and poured some of the water into a teacup. And turning to her granddaughter, she asked, "Tell me, what do you see?"
An egg, a potato, and some tea.
Yes, but what do you notice about them?
What do you mean?
Well, how are they different as a result of the boiling water? The girl stopped to think about it. Well, the egg was hard-boiled, and the potato had become soft, and the water had become tea. Do you see? Asked the grandmother. All of these face the same boiling water, but they reacted very differently. The soft egg became hardened, the potato became soft, and the tea leaves changed the water. And the girl smiled.
So you're telling me that I should be like tea leaves. Both the egg and the potato were changed by the water, but only the tea leaves changed the water. Is that the lesson?
The grandmother sat for a moment in silence before responding. No. Well, yes, and maybe. You see, all of these things, the egg, the potato, and the tea leaves, they respond to the water according to their nature. That is all they can do. But you, well, you're not an egg, or a potato, or tea leaves. But you should know this: what you choose to do will reveal your nature. The girl thanked her grandmother and left to find her friends. She still did not know for sure what action for which she would advocate with the group, but now she had a new way of thinking about the solution.
What you choose to do will reveal your nature. Is that a promise or a threat? Called to find depth in our days and reverence in this hour, we seek a gentle meditation, a deep reflection, and ardent prayer, each as we are called, and yet all together, both in this space and joining us on our virtual community. And we enter into this space by hearing the lamentations, the requests, and the remembrances of our community. Let us hear one another to heal one another. We light this first candle to recognize and to mourn the death of Inga Adams, sister to Dawn Harmon, and we hold the Harmon family, Inga's mother, dear friends, all who mourn. We hold them in our prayers as they prepare to memorialize their dear one. We light this next candle to recognize and to mourn the death of Stephen Murphy, longtime member of our congregation. Information on a memorial is forthcoming. May we hold Stephen's family and friends in our prayers as we tend our own grief with the blessing of his beautiful memory. We light this next candle for the people of Haiti as they emerge from a natural catastrophe compounded by their nation's poverty, a poverty wrought by colonialism and systemic injustice. We hold the people of Haiti in our prayers as we work for a more just world community. And we light this next candle for the people in the nation of Afghanistan. They and we cannot know what will come of this terror and transition, but of course, we worry. We pray that they hold strong, that they hold on. And we light this last candle for our healthcare workers here and abroad who have not been able to rest for a very long time and who are again faced with mounting challenges. May they feel our respect. And one more candle for the joys and sorrows that have not been shared aloud, and an invitation to hold silence together. May we hold this silence as this silence holds us. May our listening inspire acts of love. And I welcome you to continue with me in this space of prayer and meditation as you are moved. God of our understanding, this is a challenging time. Force of life and love that moves through us. We are again being faced with a time of transition and challenge. Hold us as we move through this challenging time. God of my understanding, I feel that I am in this time consistently perplexed by all that I don't understand, that I don't know about what will come, what will happen. And my heart is continually pulled backwards and forwards, back into my memories as I try and remember what was it like to be in person before with people. And pulled forward as I try and understand what will come. When will we move out of this time of challenge? And as we face the many deaths that this congregation has suffered of late, again, I feel that I am pulled backwards into my memory and forward into the future, not knowing what will come and trying to hold on to what was. And so I ask, help me to be present in this moment, not pulled backwards or forwards. God of our understanding, help us, Spirit of life and love, help us to be here present in this moment to one another, present to what faces us as we breathe in and breathe out and move through challenge and transformation. Help us to stay present right here, right now, because this is all there is. The past is just a memory, and the future we do not know. So help us to be present right now to our heart, to our mind, to our physical self, to one another. Help us to be present, to stay here, and to find what we need in this moment with these people. Amen. Our prayer response, we are climbing Jacob's ladder. I welcome you to stay seated as we share this song.
and we are climbing on. And we seek to share our blessings. 80% of what you offer will care for our congregation, and 20% will support our August and September recipient, Isaiah House. Located in East Orange, Isaiah House reduces the occurrence of homelessness, hunger, and unemployment with residential and community programs. Shelter programs serve teenage girls and boys, disabled single women, women living with HIV/AIDS, and more. And over 60% of the families served have successfully relocated to permanent housing. You can text to give using the code on the screen. You can make your donation or place your gift in the offering basket. And ushers, we invite you to please come forward. All of your gifts are worthy, and they are all received with love.
This reading is from the chapter, The Questions That Empty the Room, in Richard Gilbert's book, Growing Up Absorbed, Religious Education Among Unitarian Universalists. We are sure that one of our missions on earth is to ease the lot of those who suffer, struggle against the growing, glaring gaps between the rich and poor, place the stubborn ounces of our weight on the side of those who are trying to treat the earth as a garden and not a mine, and speak truth to power. We feel compelled to speak as powerfully as we can for the vulnerable who will be hurt with a budget that is all cuts and no taxes. The struggle is my struggle for justice, our struggle for justice. I am utterly convinced that I owe to succeeding generations a decent environment, some semblance of peace, and some approximation of justice. While I am not sure how merciful I ought to be, and while I have my doubts about God, I do know that I must invest my life in doing justice for the sake of those who live after me.
Oh, well, I learned as a child, there's two ways to see the world as it is and the way it could be. Some people say that's just not my problem. Some people do what must be done. Now they see the hole in the fabric that must be sewn. They see the way blockaded and roll back the stone. Some
Early in my journey as a Unitarian Universalist that began in this very congregation, I remember taking a class with the Reverend Charlie Ortman. I think it was the 5 questions class, but it could have been the class for new members. But what I remember in particular is his response to the question of what it is that UUs actually believe. And the answer he gave was, only what we must. And he went on to explain what it means to be a non-creedal faith and how foundational that commitment is to the core of Unitarian Universalism. And for me, coming to this faith with something of a complicated experience with Protestant Christianity, that concept of believing only what I must was so resonant for me on so many levels. My struggle reconciling my theological beliefs with the practical reality of my lived experience, well, that was the impetus that started me on the search for a new religious community, a community where I could be my full self. And to believe only what I must, well, that captures the sense of finding and reconciling my embedded theology with a more deliberative theology. But I also found that that phrase resonates because it speaks to a search for what is essential. To believe only what I must, it conveys a minimalist approach to distilling the essence of faith. And I have to say, one way that this has manifested for me is that I find I can describe my UU faith in language that is simple, succinct, and for me, satisfactory. Additionally, to believe only what I must speaks to my personal conviction that faith is grounded in more than personal preference. There are things that emerge from a deep well of need. It is not that I have arbitrarily chosen my beliefs, but rather that I believe these things because in some sense I have to. It is, for me, a necessary response to the world as I experience it. And I don't know, perhaps maybe it's that last sense of the phrase that occupies the central expression of my faith. You see, I don't think belief is enough. My belief, to borrow a phrase from Unitarian Universalist Richard Gilbert, is a necessary but not sufficient condition for faith. You see, it profoundly matters what I choose to do, not only what I choose to believe. So it is at least as relevant to not only believe what I must, but to do what must be done. And in his book, Richard Gilbert, he talks about those questions that empty the room. He says there are 3 sorts of questions that always empty the room. The first one he characterizes as mystical in nature. It is the question of why. Why is there something instead of nothing? The second question is theological in nature, and it asks the question, why live? So what? And the third question that empties the room, is the ethical question, which is, how shall I live? I think those are pretty good questions to ask. For Gilbert, and I suppose most of us would agree with him here, that first question of why is there something and not nothing ultimately is unanswerable. I mean, it is a mystery, isn't it? Certainly, that hasn't deterred a multitude of answers from a multitude of people, but let's be honest. At the end of the day, I don't know, and you don't know either. But it is because the question is unanswerable that I think it needs to be asked. But that second question, why live? So what? What's the point? Well, that is the fundamental question of meaning making. This question may not be unanswerable, but I'm going to hazard that it's a pretty good bet we're going to differ and disagree about the specific answers. Perhaps at best, answers to the second question are provisional. They are the eternal work of a life in progress. But that third question, that ethical one, how shall I live? Now that's a question that deserves, nay, demands an answer. And for me, the answer, I will do what must be done, is a pretty good starting place. Of course, as they say, the devil is in the details. To do what must be done, in one sense, is a fully comprehensive answer. I mean, it covers all the ground. But of course, it is also an explicitly non-specific answer. And it raises another really big question. What, if anything, is the relationship between what I think must be done and what you think must be done? Is there a shared collective responsibility? And if so, exactly how is that supposed to work? Should there be consensus? And what are we supposed to do in the absence of agreement? Is it just that the criteria is inherently subjective and individual and we can't do anything about it? When I return to Richard Gilbert's questions that empty the room, one of the things that I notice is that all three of the questions, as framed, could be understood as questions solely for the individual. Why do I think there is something rather than nothing? Why do I think, or what do I think is the purpose of life? How should I live? Now, while they do not explicitly exclude a collective perspective, they do implicitly privilege the individual. And let me hasten to add here, I am not in any way suggesting that that is the author's intent. In fact, anyone reading Gilbert's work knows quite the opposite. But I am trying to underscore something that I believe is really important. I think there is a very real and a very significant tension, especially in Western society, and perhaps most especially in the dominant white supremacist culture, rooted in a highly individualistic perspective that is often positioned in opposition to a collective understanding. And that certainly has relevance for this discussion about understanding what it is when we say the things that must be done, and especially in the context of religious community. Because in religious community, we are concerned not only with our personal commitments, but always with our collective responsibility. So let's return to the question, is there a shared understanding of the things that must be done? Well, essentially, what we're asking is, are there moral imperatives? And if there are, what is the nature of those imperatives? Well, that is not a new question. That question in the context of Western society has been heavily influenced by the philosophy that emerged during the Enlightenment, and most specifically by the work of Immanuel Kant. Kant's impact on Western society is truly difficult to overstate. It shows up across all disciplines. It shows up in science, in art, in ethics, and religion. Now, let me also say that there are significant critical voices that should be acknowledged, not only of Kant's thought, but of the Enlightenment as a whole. There are legitimate concerns, including the charge that much of the Enlightenment ideas have fueled nothing less than a cultural imperialism. So bringing a critical lens to this is always a good idea. But I nonetheless think Kant's work is important here for a couple of reasons. The first is that he was keenly interested in forming an ethical system that did not center at its core a divine being. Kant's revolutionary claim was that morality does not require God. Instead, he argued for a moral law that he based on the human capacity for reason. And he developed what is called the categorical imperative. What is that? Well, it is an imperative because it represents a demand or an obligation for all of us. And it was categorical in the sense that from Kant's perspective, these are truths that exist independent of how I or anyone might feel about it and irrespective of the consequences that might arise from the moral action that was taken. In other words, using the categorical imperative, Kant believed that he could arrive at what was moral action that was applicable to all people at all times and in all places, without exception. Now, he described the categorical imperative using a number of different forms, but there are two of them that are particularly important for me this morning. The first, Kant said, you should act only according to the maxim through which you can at the same time will that it would become a universal law. This is often referred to as the Universalizability Principle. For an action to be moral, it has to be universally applicable to everyone and at all times. You don't get to make exceptions for yourself. Morality means that we all are subject to that idea. And Kant said that one way to ensure that is to deliberately take the time to consider our actions from the perspective of others. The second formulation of the categorical imperative that I'm lifting up is act that you use humanity in your own person as well as in the person of any other, always at the same time as an end, never merely as a means. So what is this getting at? Well, Kant believed that each and every person had dignity. He is affirming that individual dignity of each and every person. So for an action to be moral, it cannot violate your own dignity nor the dignity of another person. And if you are hearing overtones here with the first principle of Unitarian Universalism, that we covenant to affirm and promote the inherent worth and dignity of every person, you are in fact accurate. The language is drawn directly from Kant's philosophy. Now, of course, I am overly simplifying Kant's categorical imperative. And if you look at the system, it is admittedly complex, and it is rightly criticized for being sometimes counterintuitive. When applied, it can lead to some really bizarre conclusions. And perhaps most worrisome of all is it is rigid. Rigid to the point that at times it becomes pragmatically unattainable. Just as an example, Kant says that lying is a violation of the moral law all the time. One can never lie for any reason, even if it were for a good cause in order to save a life. From Kant's perspective, you cannot lie because it is a violation of the moral law. But I do find some of Kant's thought instructive for my understanding about the things that must be done, especially those twin ideas that our moral choices should aim for a kind of universality that doesn't exclude ourselves from responsibility. And secondly, that we must always consider the perspective of others because of their inherent worth and dignity. Now, you are probably observing, correctly I might add, that I haven't really answered the question of exactly how we collectively decide the things that must be done. And quite frankly, the current state of the world would seem to argue that collective consensus is unrealistic and unattainable. The cynic in me says that if we can't come to consensus about the necessity to wear masks as a minimum effort to protect one another during a global pandemic, how are we possibly going to imagine coming together for action on issues that are far more complicated, far more ambiguous, and far more resistant to change? Point taken. But even though I may not have a lot of faith in our collective willingness to do what must be done in the widest circles, in the global or national or even regional circles, I will say that I continue to have a very active hope in some circles. I continue to have hope that our Unitarian Universalist movement can and will do what must be done. I continue to have hope that UUs in New Jersey have a commitment to do what must be done. And that's probably a good thing given my position as executive director of UU Faith Action New Jersey. It would be hard to go to work every day if I didn't believe that. And maybe most importantly for me this morning, and I have so much active hope for the possibilities in this congregation, in this faith community, that we will do what must be done. Is it challenging? Of course. Do we have sometimes some pretty extreme differences of opinion on some things? Yeah, you betcha. But our shared values and the interconnected web of mutuality can continue to lead us, however imperfectly, towards the work of collective liberation. And isn't that, at the end of the day, the work that really must be done? Remember the story of the egg and the potato and the tea leaves? They're all together in the same pot of boiling water. And they do react differently. The fragile egg resolves to become firm. The stiff potato, it softens as a result of the water. And the tea leaves, oh, those mighty tea leaves, they dare to change the very nature of the water. They all do what must be done according to their nature. And I think we too can respond, each of us individually, and yet somehow all together, in accord with our values, in commitment to our faith. And we can do that in part by asking those big questions that empty the room. Those questions that are mystical, those questions that are theological, and very much so those questions that are ethical. And together, we can do what must be done. I invite you to reflect with me. What are the values that guide you in the process of discerning what must be done? Please join us in singing our closing hymn, Building a New Way. These are words from Richard Gilbert. We are the askers of questions. It is we who wonder about the worlds beyond us and the worlds within. It is we, creatures of earth, who must ask why. The eternal question of why anything? Why are we at all? By what miracle were we born, and to what mystery do we go? What is the meaning of our brief sojourn? We fling our questions into the great beyond, hoping beyond hope that someone, something, somewhere will hear our cry and respond. We wonder, hopefully, in the great cosmic silence. Sometimes, a still small voice responds, coming from without or within, we do not know. Sometimes we hear answers to our questions, some hint that our lives are worthwhile, that it is good to ask even if we are not answered. Sometimes we sense the great cosmic approval that we belong here, that asking the questions are part of what it means to be human, and that we are part of the answer ourselves.
Go
from that.